Hello and welcome to my studio. This is episode 14 of the Green Bean podcast. I'm Katie and this is Jack, and we're both really glad that you're here to join us for a chat about my creative projects. In this episode, I've got a bit of catching up to do with you actually. I'm back from a recent trip to the United States, so I want to tell you about that. I've got a new drawing project to share with you, some knitting, some sewing, and a book that I've been reading. But before we get started, I wanted to tell you about an amazing gift that we received for the podcast. I'm not going to name the gifter because they haven't given me permission to do so, but a supporter of the podcast got in touch and offered to buy me a gimbal, which is a piece of camera equipment, and I received it while I was in America. So I used it to record some footage of my hikes out in the national parks. Now what I will say is that it's quite a grown-up piece of equipment for me, and I'm on a bit of a steep learning curve with it. I feel like what I've got so far is a little bit rubbish. I've got lots to learn, but I really wanted to share some of that footage with you anyway because I really wanted you to see that part of my trip. So forgive it being a little bit wobbly in here and there. I hope that in the long run this gimbal is going to really offer me so many more options in terms of what I can share with you out on our walks and on Dartmoor. So I'm incredibly grateful for the gift. Thank you so much, and I hope you're all going to enjoy the benefits of it. Without further ado, let's get started and share what I've been up to. Now you may or you may not know that since I last recorded, I went on a trip to America. I went for a couple of reasons. The main reason was I went for work. I was invited as a guest speaker to Lit Up Festival, which is a literary festival for teenagers, organised by teenagers. And that took place in a city called Independence, which is just outside of Kansas City in Missouri. And yeah, I mean, it was such a pleasure to be invited to speak at this festival, and I can't tell you how inspiring it was to meet this young woman named Emery Ulig, and she started the festival for the first time last year when she was just 15 years old, because she felt like there should be a literary festival that was specifically aimed at her age group. Now, if you don't know, I am the author of a graphic memoir called Lighter Than My Shadow, and I wrote it, it was published in the UK almost 6 years ago, and it's about my teenage years. I struggled with eating disorders and sexual abuse, and it's a book about the process of those struggles, obviously, and also about my recovery. And Emery had picked up my book, I think, in her local library, and she chose me as one of the authors that she wanted to invite to her festival. So I was incredibly honoured to go. And it was just an amazing event. It was so well organised. All of the speakers were lovely and inspiring, and I came home with half a suitcase full of books. But one of the things that amazed me most about the festival was obviously there were a lot of people around Emery
helping her and supporting her to organise it. She didn't do it single-handedly, and she got the support of her local library and lots of sponsors, and that meant that the whole festival was free for people to attend. So free for kids to come and spend the day listening to authors, meeting authors. They also had free books for all the young people to take away, and there was free food throughout the day. So it was, it was an event that was accessible to lots of people. And like I say, I was just really proud to be able to speak there. And my intention was that I was going to record a little bit of video every day when I was in America, so I would have this kind of daily diary podcast to share with you. And when I got there, I just was so absorbed in what I was doing and busy having a good time. And I'm sorry that means that my account of my trip is going to be slightly different. But it does mean I think I enjoyed my trip a whole lot more. So thanks for being understanding about that. So that, yeah, the festival was my main purpose in going. But seeing as I was over on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, I took the opportunity to go and visit some friends, which is such a gift. I have, because of the magic of the internet, I have friends all over the world. And the sad thing about the internet is that I don't get to see those friends very often. So I really wanted to make the most of this opportunity, and I managed to see several friends this time. And almost all of the extra footage that you're going to see in this episode is from those parts of the trip. So after I finished in Kansas City, I flew to Chicago. My friend Molly Johansson lives just outside Chicago, and I spent a few days staying with her and her family. And we mostly did relaxing together. It was so nice. Molly took me on one particularly special outing, which was to a little library museum near where she lived. It was a complete surprise. She didn't tell me anything about where we were going or what to expect. And I walked into this place, and there in the middle of the room was J.R.R. Tolkien's writing desk. And next to it, C.S. Lewis's writing desk. And you would turn around and there was the wardrobe that inspired The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe that C.S. Lewis wrote. And it just took my breath away. I can't believe that, first of all, that these things are hiding away in a tiny museum in the Midwest. But that Molly had kept it a complete surprise from me. And that, I, who consider myself a big fan of those writers, had no idea that these things were there and really close to where I was visiting my friend. So that was a real highlight for me. But also just getting to spend time with Molly and knitting together and playing with her sweet guinea pig, Nibbles, who you'll see a little bit of in the podcast. After my few days with Molly, I flew down from Chicago to Charlotte, North Carolina to meet up with my friend Rachel. And I say meet up because it was the very first time that we'd met in person. So I was a little bit nervous, and I'm sure that she was as well. But we have been friends and worked together online for the last couple of years. So I felt fairly sure that we were going to get on, but until you meet in person, you never really know. Luckily, we did get on extremely well, and we had a lovely few days together. One of the adventures that Rachel took me on was a journey out to the mountains near Asheville, North Carolina, where we met up with Maria of the Woolen Forest podcast and Maria of the Ninja Chickens podcast. Hi Marias, if you're watching. And we spent, first of all, an evening out in an Airbnb in the mountains, just knitting together and relaxing. And again, that's one of the things that I had hoped to capture on video. And then in that moment, it just didn't feel like the right thing to do. It felt like it would have interrupted that moment of us spending time together. And then the following day, we went to visit Maria Ninja Chickens at her house. And that was just such a joy. It was a beautifully sunny day to drive up into the mountains. The drive was stunning. And we got to explore Maria's garden and meet all of her cats. And yeah, it was a really special day. And the day after that, Rachel took me down to South Carolina to visit my first ever national park in America. So I've done quite a lot of travelling in America, particularly I've been to New York several times because of work and book related things, but I've never actually been out into the countryside. So this was a real special moment for me because you all know how much I love the countryside. So Rachel took me to Congaree National Park in South Carolina, which is a old growth swamp forest. That's probably not the technical term. Anyway, it's this kind of marshy, swampy area. It's very, very flat with tall, bald cypress trees, the kind of trees that come up out of the swamp, and the roots have what they call knees poking out of the water. And it was hot and rich, and the air felt really heavy. And we don't get temperatures like that in the UK hardly ever, so it was really, slightly unpleasant, but also wonderful to experience being that warm. There are incredible birds around and vegetation, lots and lots of lichens and fungi, which obviously I'm really, really into. And we did a lovely long hike around that national park. We did about 12 miles, which in that heat felt like a lot longer. So we came home absolutely exhausted, but having had the best time. So that's a short summary of my trip. You'll see bits and pieces of it spaced throughout the podcast, but I had a fantastic time and I came home absolutely shattered. And then I took a week off once I got back home because I know that I struggle with jet lag when I'm flying back in this direction from west to east. So I took a week off to recover, and now I'm back at work and back to normal, whatever that means.
The drawing I'm working on today is a new self-portrait, and there are various reasons behind that. The first and most obvious probably is that I've had my hair cut. This is something I do from time to time. I like to grow my hair long. I always have this fantasy that I'm going to wear my hair in beautifully elaborate braids, but the reality is that I'm a person who cannot be bothered to do anything with my hair. So it gets long, and then it gets to a certain point and it just drives me mad, particularly when the weather starts to get warmer. So I lost my patience when I was in America and it was so hot. I decided that was it, the time had come, and I had it all cut off. And luckily this time I had enough length on it to be able to donate the bits that were cut off to the Little Princess Trust, which makes wigs for young people in need of hair. So I was really, really glad to be able to do that, and in the process relieve myself of this extra weight. But it does mean that any self-portraits that I've got are now looking slightly out of date. And the other part of that is that because of my holiday and being really busy with my shop and with Edinburgh Yarn Festival, I actually haven't done any drawing for a long time. I've done a little bit here and there, and I've certainly done some drawing for clients, but nothing personal, nothing for myself since I finished the green bean. And I always find when I've had a bit of a break that one of the ways back in is to just start with a self-portrait. It's something small and manageable, and just a good way of dipping my toe back in. I have realised I don't have a pencil at my desk, so I'm going to grab a pencil and then we'll get started. So the most likely use for this self-portrait is going to be my avatar for social media. So that little circle that you see to identify me on Instagram is probably what I'm going to use for. So I've laid out a square on my paper here, and I'm basing this drawing on a sketch that I did earlier. Just a rough sketch when I had an idea of what this portrait might look like. It won't surprise you that Jack is also in the image. So I've ruled out a 10 by 10 centimetre square, and I'm going to start sketching just with a 2B pencil, fairly soft, and just start roughing out the shape that I'm going to be doing. So you'll probably see that for the sake of economy, I'm just using a piece of paper that I've already done several drawings on. This here is a piece of client work. This here that you can just see in the corner was a little bit for client work, and on the bottom of the paper you can see I've just used it to test out my paintbrush colours. So these big sheets of watercolour paper are often the right size for a single piece of work, but they're also frequently big enough for me to get several pieces of work on one sheet. So I like to do that before I remove the piece of paper. The reason for that is that it's attached to a block where the paper is pre-stretched. So if I remove the paper, it's then I have to stretch it again before I add any wet colour to it or paint. So it saves me a bit of work to use it while it's already on this block. Now I'm just thinking, for Instagram this is likely to be cropped to a circle, so I just want to make sure that we're going to get enough of, we don't want Jack's head being cut off from this circle, so I think probably I'm going to draw things a little bit smaller. So we'll start again. something I really want to get across in this self-portrait is my love of nature, and obviously my name being green as well, it makes sense that green would be one of the prominent colours. My current social media profile picture is a silhouette of Jack and I standing up on Dartmoor, which I love, but it's mostly blue, which is not the correct colour, so I'm going to make sure that this image has lots and lots of greenery in it. There, now I think I've got the image the right size this time, but the face isn't quite central, so what I'm going to do is fiddle around with the border that I drew. In fact, I might just remove it altogether. And then draw a new circle around this image. I have an idea of where I want it to fall in the circle, but what I will actually do is I'll extend the image out to be a square so that I have the option to print it as business cards as well if I like it, which hopefully I will. The next stage of this drawing is to add the outline in ink, so I'm going to be using my favourite Pigma Micron pen, holding it upside down, the 01, which is a 0.25mm width line. It's a very fine pen and it's my favourite one for working with. What's important about it is that it's a permanent ink, so when I go to put inks, or if I wanted to put watercolours on top of it, those lines won't smudge. So I'm going to use this pen to fill in the main outlines of my drawing first, and then I will add some of the tiny details. This is possibly my favourite bit of the process. I really enjoy just working with a black pen. So I have now finished all of the ink outlines on this drawing, and I'm going to start adding the colour. And if you see me do any work in colour before, you've probably seen me talk about these inks, which are a German calligraphy ink that I use for painting. And the reason that I use them rather than watercolours is because they're permanent when they dry, so I can add layers of colour without it smudging and darkening the colours underneath. It's just a process that I've got used to and I really like. So I've picked out a palette of all my different greens, no surprises there, and a couple of browny, orangey kind of colours, and I'm ready to get started and finish this illustration.
So the first thing I'm going to do is add a wash of green to the background. So that's going to be like my base colour. So I'm going to mix a couple of greens in very, very light tones. So I'm going to add quite a lot of water to the ink. And probably, in fact, what I'm going to do first is just add a wash of water to the background. So I'm covering all of the image apart from myself and Jack. So all of those leaves are going to get a first layer of pale green just to set the tone for the background. The problem that I now have, or I guess it's not a problem, it's just a constraint that I now have, is that I can't move on with the next stage of the painting until this stage is dry. And that's because while the colours are still wet, they bleed into each other. And obviously in this background layer, that's the effect that I wanted to create. But for example, next I maybe want to paint my hair or my dress. I don't want those darker colours to bleed into the background colours. So I'm going to need to wait patiently for each layer to dry before I add the next layer of colour. And that means that I've got some emails and some admin work to do in between times, or I might just get in a few rows on my socks. I've now finished adding all of the coloured inks to this drawing, and I just want to add some finishing touches using coloured pencil. And the reason I do that is I can get more fine details with the sharp tip of a pencil than I can with the paintbrush. And also you can get more saturated colours, so I use it to add a subtle bit of shading to define, you know, the features of the illustration that I want to stand out from the background, and add a bit more definition too. So I'm just going to crack on with that. In terms of knitting, I do have a new cast on to share with you, although it doesn't feel very new anymore. It's definitely a half-finished project. So when I was with my friend Molly, we decided to cast on a pair of socks together for various reasons. It's always nice to have a new project when you're travelling. And also Molly hadn't knitted a pair of socks before, so she wanted some of my help, and well, not so much help as moral support in casting on. So we had an evening where we both cast on a pair of the Pebbles and Pathways socks by Marceline Smith. It's a lovely textured cable and garter stitch pattern, and there are so many clever little details about this project that I really like, that you sort of don't realise until you start knitting. But the way that the garter stitch breaks up the rhythm of the project means that you don't have to count rows to know when you need to do your cable. It's obvious within the pattern, and it has rest rows where you just knit in between. So it keeps things nice and simple, but also engaging enough that it's not a boring project. The balance is just right, I think. So we both cast on a pair, and me being a slightly faster knitter than Molly, I have finished one sock already. I popped it on a sock blocker so it'd be easier for you to see. So these socks are knitted toe up, so I cast on at the toe and worked my way up to the cuff. That's not my normal way of knitting socks. I usually knit from the cuff down, so there were various different challenges in here for me. It's covered in dog hair, sorry. First of all, I don't like the way that a standard sock toe fits my foot. That was a mouthful. So if you're knitting cuff down, then you would bind your toe with Kitchener stitch. If you're knitting toe up, then you might use a Turkish cast on, which I love. I love a Turkish cast on, but it gives that kind of flat top to a toe, which doesn't fit my feet very well. I've got quite pointy feet, so I prefer a barn toe, which is this, it's a little bit more pointy, so it starts with a pinhole cast on, and then you increase stitches up in a similar way as you would with a normal toe, but instead of having that flat blunt edge at the bottom, it has a more of a rounded, almost pointy edge, which fits me a bit better. So that was the first modification that I made, and that's where I'm up to on this second sock, which doesn't look like very much. It's a tiny, tiny sock. And I think, whatever kind of where you start when you're doing a project with just a few stitches on the needle, it always feels so fiddly in that beginning. So I'm definitely wrestling with these stitches a little bit. But I love the way that a barn toe fits my foot. And also another advantage of a barn toe is when you're knitting a cuff down sock, you just decrease until there are 8 or 10 stitches left, thread the yarn through and pull it tight the way you would at the top of a hat. There is no Kitchener stitch, which for me is a definite advantage. I do not enjoy Kitchener stitch at all. And I think what's happened, because I've learned about the magic of barn toes, is that I've suddenly become a sock knitter. You might have noticed in the last episode and in this one, I've been knitting socks, and in previous episodes I have confessed, or even not been ashamed at all, of the fact that I hate knitting socks. So something has suddenly happened to change that, and I think that a barn toe might be a large part of it, because I'm managing to avoid Kitchener stitch. There's definitely another factor at work as well, and that is that I am running out of store-bought socks. I mentioned this in the last episode, that I've made something of a commitment towards having a handmade wardrobe, which is great. I love knitting garments, I love sewing garments, and I'm getting to the point where I can pretty much dress in handmade clothes every day, which is wonderful. But the things that I don't have handmade are the things that I've hated making. So socks first, and in terms of sewing underwear, I've never sewn any underwear, and we will get to the point where I have to start sewing underwear. But for me the most urgent thing is socks. I do at least 5 miles walking every day, so I do wear through my socks. So my hand knitted socks need to be hard wearing and also beautiful. And yeah, so I've suddenly got into knitting socks. I don't know how it happened. I have no other explanation than need, and I found a way to avoid Kitchener stitch. The yarn I'm using for these socks is a all wool, no nylon sock blend from Woolly Mammoth in Ireland. And the blend is a worsted spun combination of Blueface Leicester, which is a long wool luster fibre, and Cheviot, which is a hill breed of sheep. So together they make a pretty hard wearing combination. And what's also different about this yarn is it has a higher twist than usual. So when you add twist to a yarn, that adds strength. So in terms of how it feels when I'm knitting it, I get the impression that it's going to be fairly tough. It's never going to be as tough as something that's got synthetic fibres in it, but I like the fact that I'm going to have a plastic-free pair of socks. What's also special about Woolly Mammoth is that she dyes all of her colours with plants. So this particular colour I have is a gorgeous soft pink, and that's probably going to surprise you. It certainly surprised me. I'm going through a pink phase at the moment, and I find it as unexplainable as my sock phase. I don't know what's going on. I do love green, but you can't just wear green things all the time. You have to have some complementary colours, and I do think pink and green go nicely together. So yeah, this is a one-of-a-kind colour, but she dyes lots of repeatable colours as well, and they're all these kind of soft, muted tones of natural dyes. This one has some specks of yellow in it, and I picked it because it felt very spring-like. It felt appropriate for my trip, for my mood, and I love the fact that I picked pink, which is a usual colour for my friend Molly, and my friend Molly picked green for her Pebbles and Pathways socks. So it just adds another level to the meaning of the project, in that our socks will always make each of us think of the other one, which I think is really special.
I don't think it will surprise anybody to hear that I haven't been doing any sewing lately. The obvious reason for that is that I've been travelling, but the other reason is that since my Etsy shop has been open selling my tea towels and brooches and various other goodies, my kitchen table has been permanently taken over as an order packing station, which is lovely, and I'm really enjoying working on that. But it has meant that I haven't had space or time for sewing recently, although I'm definitely feeling a desire to make something new. And I thought, seeing as I've done this drawing of myself wearing a green dress, it was high time I made myself a green dress. I can't believe I've never actually done that before. So from my stash I pulled out this green linen, which I bought from Ray Stitch in London, which is one of my favourite fabric shops. It's a more sagey green than I had hoped for. I saw it online and I ordered it by mail order, so I hadn't seen the colour in person. But to be honest, it's green. So long as it's not neon, I'm probably going to like it. It's a lovely soft green. I'm definitely going to enjoy wearing it. I had hoped it would be a little bit more olivey, but I can live with it. It's got a nice drape to it. It's a really fine linen. I'm definitely going to have to put a lining in there because it's a little bit see-through. And what I was thinking is that I would make another version of, you can't see the dress that I'm wearing because I have a jumper, but I'll pop a picture in of my favourite dress that I've been making over and over again for the last few months. I thought I'd make another one. It would just be really simple in this plain fabric, and that I would add some embroidery around the neck. So that's going to be my next sewing project when I have time. I don't know when that's going to be. Lastly, in this episode, I wanted to talk about what I've been reading, and thank you so much to everybody who left comments about enjoying the reading segment in the previous episode. It was the first time I'd talked about a book, and it seems that you're happy for me to add that as a regular feature to the podcast. So that's great. I hope that you'll continue to enjoy it and that it will continue inspiring me to read as well. The book I've picked out this time is called The Hedgerow Handbook by Adele Nozedar, and I'm very sorry, Adele, if I'm mispronouncing your surname. I've had this book for maybe a year, maybe even longer, and confession, I keep it in the bathroom. I don't know if you're the kind of person who keeps books in the bathroom or not, but I do, and I consider it a very high honour if a book manages to stay in there long term, because it means I'm really enjoying it. Books that work really well in the bathroom for me are ones that are non-fiction and that are small segments of information that you can take in one visit. So this book is perfect, and what it does is it covers lots of different hedgerow plants that grow around the UK. If you are in a country that doesn't have hedgerows, they're so iconic in our landscape. It's hard to imagine even how to describe them, but they're these kind of, they can be huge or they can be quite low. They're basically hedges that define the boundaries of roads and fields, and they're one of the remaining kind of outposts of biodiversity. So they're home for lots of different species of plants and a shelter for birds, animals, all kinds of different things grow there. And this particular book focuses on the plants of the hedgerows, and it talks about how to forage for them. And I also love the fact that it covers some of the folklore aspects and traditional herbal remedies that can be created from them as well. In terms of the food recipes, I haven't actually tried any of them, and that's because most of them involve preserving things with a lot of sugar, and Although I do eat and love sugar, I try not to have too much of it in my life, so none of the recipes is particularly called to me as something that I have to make. But it's full of lovely ideas of things that you can make with ingredients that you find or forage in the hedgerows. And yeah, as I say, it's a lovely book. And the other thing that's lovely about it, as well as the information, is the beautiful illustrations. So they're kind of pencil illustrations that are part coloured in watercolour, and I love the subtlety of the colours and the details. I really get absorbed in them. So it's definitely got a good balance of being a technical information book as well as inspiring drawings that are technical enough for you to be able to identify the flowers and plants. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Green Bean podcast. I hope you've enjoyed hearing what I've been working on. If you want to keep in touch between now and the next episode, you can find me on Instagram and Ravelry as Katie Greenbean. And if you want to support the podcast, we are on Patreon at patreon.com/Katie Greenbean. I have some exciting things coming up in the next few weeks. I'm going to be starting some new projects. Particularly, I'm looking forward to starting work on a new issue of my zine, The Green Bean. So I will look forward to sharing that with you next time. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!